This is Tanya Lynn with the Sistership Circle podcast. From spirituality, sexuality, and sisterhood to business, relationships, contribution, and creativity, the Sistership Circle podcast introduces a new model of feminine leadership where women get real and vulnerable about it all. Tune in for authentic advice that will empower you to be bold, beautiful, and brilliant as your true self. Hello, sisters. I'm really excited and a little nervous about this conversation.
Oh.
So we're going to be talking about how to create an equitable circle and talking about race, equity, diversity. This is a conversation that I think is really important. And so I've invited the amazing expert, Trudi Lebron, to join us for this conversation. So, sisters, if you're live, let me know where you're calling in from. Would love to see who's here with us. And, this has been quite a hot topic out there in the personal development industry.
Yeah.
And I have been witnessing and learning for the past year. And when I saw Trudi at the Transformational Leaders Retreat that we were both at, and Trudi spoke, I got really committed and really clear that I wanted to bring this conversation alive in Sistership Circle and really come forward with it. And I know that this is not my expertise, and so I have to bring in the experts. And so that's why Trudi's here today. So thanks, Trudi. I'm really happy that you are here to talk with us about me.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for, being willing to take this on. This is tough stuff.
Yeah, it is. It is tough stuff.
It is.
In preparation, I was listening to Trudi's podcast, and she's got this incredible podcast where they just talk all about all of these things. It's called That's Not How This Works.
That's not how that works.
Not how that works.
Yeah.
And the episode that I listened to was where Glendon Doyle, who is the founder of Monastery, very popular blog. She's got a lot of followers, and she was trying to come out and bring this conversation alive and got shut down. And so Trudi and her partner on the show, the creators of the show, they were talking about this. And so I just felt like it's something that as a white woman, I can't lead this conversation. I need support, and I need experts to come in and talk about this. And that it's really about me letting Sistership Circle women know about this incredible resource, Trudi's course, that's coming up very soon, so that you can get educated. So I just want to throw it over to you, Trudi, of where do we even start to talk about this conversation? And probably people are like, tell me what we're even talking about. So maybe we should even start there, right?
What are we even talking about, right? What are we even talking about? Yeah. So what we're talking about in the context of creating an inclusive, equitable circle, right? We're talking about how do you create an environment in your work that is safe for all kinds of people, right? For people of color, for people on different, on the different gender spectrum, right? For people with different abilities, for people with different cultural beliefs, right? How do we create spaces that are safe and open and inclusive to everyone? That's really what we're talking about. And so that requires us to talk about things like race, right? And privilege and bias and prejudice, because you can't talk about the solution unless you understand the problem. So that's what we're talking about. You think that's clear enough?
Yes. And okay, Michelle says, thank you for starting this conversation. So yes. So I'll just give a little bit of background too of last year. There were a couple things that went down, couple people getting shut down. And I remember it was actually an article that was brought to my attention of, hey, what do you think of this? And I was like, what? And I did not even know that this conversation existed. And I was like, but I'm not racist, but at the same time, I was having a lot of women come to Sistership Circle and say, hey, Tanya, you're a bunch of white women. What's going on with that? As a woman of color, I don't feel safe coming into your space. And I was like, but why not? And it's kind of like I didn't know what I didn't know.
Right.
And so that's really what started this. And then I started following and finding women like Trudi who are experts in teaching how to navigate this conversation.
Yeah.
So what do you want to say?
There's so much there. I think that like the reaction that you had, but I'm not racist. And like, what do you mean that you don't feel welcome? Like that is such a classic response. And I totally understand where it comes from. It comes from this place where we have all kind of come up in this world, right? That we've been taught, that most people have been taught not to see color, that every goal is like equality, right? That we should all just be treating people the same, that, we're all the same on the inside, like all these things, right? And so a lot of people feel like if you just believe that everyone's the same and you don't treat anybody different and, just be welcoming, that's enough, right? That's the bar for, being a good person, right? That's enough. And so, to say, but I'm not a racist because you haven't blatantly done anything that is like demonstrates discrimination in a way that's rooted around race, right? It doesn't mean that you're open and inclusive and safe. Like it doesn't mean those things. We actually need, so I get my reaction that I was thinking, I was like, yep, those are all the classic examples. And so what we need to understand really is that people are different and that's okay, and that it's okay to see color, and that it's okay to acknowledge that people have different cultural beliefs and different life experiences. We have to acknowledge those things. We also have to acknowledge that, historically, there have been people who held a lot of power, and those people have been typically white men, right? And that those people have institutionally, like very explicitly and institutionally, withheld power and access from other people, on the basis of race and other things too, but that race is a big part of that, and that we have the ramifications of that are very much in existence today, and that there are still people who do those things today. I mean, we can turn on the TV and see a whole bunch of examples of how people are being withheld access and kind of oppressed on the basis of race and what country you were born in and whether or not you speak English. Like all those things are still in existence today. So we need to be able to see that and understand it so that we can start to undo some of it, in our small corners of the world.
Yes. One thing that I love about just the way you're speaking right now is you're very gentle in bringing this conversation forward, and so you feel safe. And that's why I'm bringing you to our community as a resource and as a teacher mentor for women who want to dive into this conversation more fully and deeply, because you create that safe space. And I think that was actually something that really stood out and that I've been really feeling into is, what is this distinction of safe versus brave space? And you said this really well on the podcast where you both dove in to how do we create the safety for people to actually have this conversation. Because if you're not feeling safe, you're not actually going to be able to be brave and to have conversations like this. So how do we start to create that safe space within Sistership Circle? Or if women are here as leaders creating that in their own communities, how do we start to do that?
Yeah, I think part of it is to really kind of be open and be humble. So be open to the fact that like you're going to make mistakes and that people are going to call you out on your mistakes. Hopefully they call you into your mistakes. It's like, into awareness and into kind of, alternative way of like being and showing up. And to kind of be able to be humble and to just kind of say like, you know what? you're right. I was wrong. That I shouldn't have said that. Like, I think people are so afraid of being like called a racist because they feel like it's this like attack that shoots right into your heart, right? And you're like, oh, but I'm a good person, and that's not what I meant. But if you can kind of try to separate the emotion from what people are saying and really try to understand where people are coming from, like they might be saying to you that what you did caused harm. And being able to say like, whoa, even though I didn't intend that, I can own both my intent and the impact that I've had, and I can try to repair that, right? So that's where we start, is really kind of taking a step, taking this step to be a little more open, a little more humble, and not being so defensive, like I have to protect, I think that's where so many people go wrong. And when we see some of these things play out on social media where people are being really like, shut down, a lot of it comes from this instinct that people have to like deflect and say, but that's not what I meant. And not just that person, but we and I call it the woke Olympics, for like other people to kind of get in and start to like defend, and like, you just have to wait. You have to like take a step back and let things play out and let people take ownership for what they've said and done. And the other thing that I'll say is that I get it, and it's definitely a compliment. I want to show up in spaces, especially in these kind of, ways to introduce this work to people in a very open and gentle and safe way. And so I take that as a compliment. And, there are also times when I'm a little more direct and a little more, I lay it down for people, like I really call people into things and, and say it like it needs to be said. However, I really believe in this idea of safety, right? People can't grow. Here's basically what happens, and this is a conversation. If you don't have a safe space and you're, really holding people accountable and, saying some things that are super direct and, really asking people to do some deep inquiry into their identities, if they're not in a safe container to do that, you risk causing harm. Like you can traumatize a person, and that is unacceptable. There's a guy who does this work. His name is Dr. T, and I was listening to one of his, podcasts that he was on, and he was like, that's malpractice. And I absolutely agree. If you're a coach and you're trying to help people grow and you do something that further traumatizes them, that's wrong. Like maybe like that's just wrong. And the distinction I'll make is also not everyone is a coach, right? So there are some people who are educators first, and I'm not here to tell anyone how to do their job, but for me as a coach, that is my profession, right? I own the responsibility to move people into growth in a very safe and hard and challenging way. Like you can be hard and challenging and also not cause damage. You can do that.
Yeah, and I'm in the same boat, and that's what I've learned over time is I'm a super intense, very direct, like people say I'm overly masculine sometimes. It's like I can go right in there. And what I've learned over becoming more of a feminine leader and a facilitator is that I've got to balance that out with compassionate accountability and gentleness, and how do I create a safe space? Because what I found is sometimes when I'm coming directly in and someone's not ready for that, they're not going to hear anything that I'm saying. No. And if we're having this conversation that's already supercharged, we have to create that safe space. And I love that distinction that you had that we actually use in Sistership Circle, which is the difference between calling out and calling in. And when we could call people in and ask them to lean into the conversation, we can make so much more headway. And that's what absolutely. I love about you is we are so aligned, and I'm so excited to share with everyone your course and the work that you do and bring you in here because you're really aligned with the values of how I believe that we can create this. And my stand for 2019 is radical inclusivity. And I love that. I think one of the things that you said that if we're wanting to start to bring this conversation into our organizations, and I want to create Sistership Circles more inclusive, that we can start by simply stating that, right? And looking at our marketing materials and our websites and, and starting there by looking at, is the front of my business, is the front of our organization actually aligned with that? And that's one of the things that I learned from you. And, we've got Sistership Circle Day coming up soon. And I was very concerned about, we had an image of women. And even though it was a silhouette, I was like, I don't know, honestly, if this is going to appeal to, if this is inclusive. Yes, there is a woman of color in that picture, but you can't tell. So we decided to go with something that didn't have an image of women in it. And so I'm starting to look at that of how do we start to actually have the face of Sistership Circle be reflective of our value and of our stand, and that it's a work in progress. And I'm starting kind of, I'm starting on this one side and I'm slowly moving over. So anything that you want to speak on that?
Yeah, I think it's great that you're having that awareness. And what I want to point out is that, like, you have, like you said earlier, that you started kind of learning about this stuff, a year ago, right? Yep. Like this is open up. So, which is great. For people who are listening to this, I want to be really clear that the first place you start in this is really with yourself. So the first thing isn't a website design. It isn't a branding assessment. It's really like internal work, because here's the thing, and and I encourage you to. That's why I love that you're having this conversation, because Sistership Circle, it's many people in many different spaces, right? So if your front end looks inclusive, but then when people show up, if that in-person component isn't right, that's an issue. Like, that's going to be a big problem. So people need to start with themselves and really kind of say, I need to be aware of what these issues are. Let me look at my own life, right? Who do I currently serve? Does my major audience look like me mostly? Who do I follow? Who are the thought leaders that I follow? Who are the authors of the books that I read? Who are the people who host the podcasts that I listen to? Do all those people look like me? Do most of those people look like me? Why? Right? Why? Why is that? Because I'll tell you what it's not. It's not that there's lack of people of color doing this work. That's not the case. It's usually because you're isolated in a community that's, that's like a homogeneous community that's mostly just looks like you. And so you have to take intention, and that's by design, right? Like, again, back to that kind of whole idea around people creating systems and building, even to the communities that we live in, the schools that we go to, all of these things look and feel the way they do by design. Podcast. Ooh, there was a little glitch.
We're back.
To maybe make that commitment to just diversify the people in my life and be aware of these issues, so that when someone shows up in my circle, when people show up in my circle who don't look like me, that I know that I actually know what to do, or I know better about how to create a container, that I'm not going to microaggress against them. I'm not going to say something. I'll know how to be prepared. If I say something that was offensive, I'll know how to respond to it. Or if someone else in the group says something that is a microaggression, or that I'll know still things, those personal parts of this work kind of have to be in place. And it's never perfect, right? That's why our course is called Working Towards Woke, because it's a process. But you want to be, again, in that space of just learning and being humble and being open and assuming responsibility and just doing better. And, I use the word microaggression. I know not everyone knows, may be familiar with that terminology. A microaggression is something that happens, it's something that we say or do that's like a small, just like a small stereotype or a small kind of stab at a person that's usually based on race, but could be based on other things. So I'll give you an example. If someone says to me, where are you from? And I say, Connecticut. Or someone said yes, and I say Connecticut, and they go, no, where are you really from? Like I have a friend who's Filipino, and people will ask her where she's from, and she'll say, I'm from Philly, and they're like, no, well, where are you really from? And she's like, no, really, I'm from Philly. And they'll continue to say, like, well, where are your parents from? She's like, they're from Philly too. Like, but that, you know, what this person, so what's happening in that experience is that she's telling the truth, right? She knows where she's from. And what the other person is saying, they're not asking her where she's from. They want her to identify themselves. And by saying, no, where are you from really, there's all these like subtext there. One is that I don't believe you, right? Two, so you're lying. I don't believe you're lying. Two is that I somehow feel entitled, as the asker of that question, I feel entitled to know where you're from for whatever reason, like even if you don't want to tell me. And three, and most important, that there is no way you could possibly be from Philly because of how you look. So that's what that kind of saying is. That's what those words are saying, the subtext of those words. And so it may not feel to people that that's a big deal, like in one interaction. But what happens for people of color, for people with marginalized identities, is that it happens multiple times a day, every day of their life. And so the long-term ramifications of that, like there are psychological ramifications of that include like depression and anxiety and isolation and, you know, like all of those things come from kind of moving through the world in a way that you just don't feel like you belong. And so if someone shows up to your sistership circle and they get this kind of, no, where are you from really? Or can I touch your hair? Or, you know, or any number of things, like any kind of other assumptions that we make about people. Or like for women of color, particularly women who are Black, to say something like, oh, you speak so eloquently, or you're so articulate. Like, why wouldn't they be? Like, you know, if they show up in your space and hear something like that, that's damaging. Like that tarnishes the relationship, and like it breaks the safety of your space. And that's why, you know, you have gotten messages from people who say like, it's a bunch of white women, like I don't know if I belong. It's also the reason why before I go to a conference or a retreat or a mastermind, I look at the website and I ask, like, are there any people of color here? Because even though I am very fair skinned and I have a lot of privilege because of that, like I also don't want to get a lot of questions about my race, or if I speak Spanish, or hear other things that are said about other people. Like I don't want to have to deal with that.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because we might ask a question like that of, well, where are you really from? Or do you speak Spanish, as a way of connecting, but we don't understand that doesn't feel good as the receiver of that, and it's just so unconscious. And what I really hear is like, the first step for us really is to start to unpack the whole way that we relate with people of color, and not even that, it's like unpacking our belief system that we've been, it's just blind. Like it's just, this is the belief system we can't even see. And this is just like doing any spiritual work, you know, like I've done a lot of work around understanding mother-father wound and my blind spots of the limited beliefs that I learned from them. But now this is a whole nother level of unpacking those limited beliefs around this conversation. And this just feels like the next level of spirituality, to be honest. Right?
It really is. Like it's becoming more, I always tell people, like, we have to, if we're ever going to be in a society where where race doesn't matter, and really what the goal is around race is that race is not linked to life outcomes, right? That's the goal. And right now they very much are. So someone's race is very much, like, statistically, based on someone's race and their zip code, we can make a lot of good guesses about their education level, their life expectancy, their health, all, like, their married, you know, whether or not they're married, how many kids they have. We can make statistical inferences about people based on their race. That is because of racism. We want to get to a space where we can no longer do that, right? Where we can no longer say, oh, this person is this race, this is probably what their life looks like. That's not what we want to erase that, right? That's the idea of post-racial. If we're ever going to get there, we have to kind of go through this time stuff in our work, in the kind of the way that we are in communities with people. So there's real opportunity there. And what's the magical piece of this is that when we do that, we actually are better for everyone. Like, we just create a better experience for everyone. And this is the concept of universal design and design. People who build buildings, if you've ever been in a building with more than one floor, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about, right? So now, if you build a building with a certain amount of floors, you have to put an elevator, you have to put a wheelchair ramp, right? That's standard. Like, we just have to do that. It's a rule, right? It's just a rule. Why is it a rule? Because of accessibility. Like, we know that people who have limited accessibility need to be able to get into the building, and they need to be able to get up and down the floors and whatever. But do people who with 2 functioning legs get on the elevator? Yeah, absolutely. Do we benefit from the elevator being there? Every single day, right?
I love that.
So it's an accessibility issue that everybody benefits from. And that's the same thing in our businesses and our schools. When we design our programs, our businesses, everything, our interactions with people, our method of coaching even, when we design that with an awareness, just an awareness, but a priority around people who kind of have these marginalized identities, everybody's experience is better.
We've got a comment. Hi, Sam. Glad you're here with us. So Sam wrote, why can we not just be genuinely interested to ask where someone is from? I often ask and will ask about their culture, traditions, recognizing their ethnicity and being welcoming. I work with many women of color as a midwife in Canada. Many of our clients are immigrants and have specific beliefs around childbirth. So she finds it's respectful to ask. And I would hate to end up feeling frightened to ask in case I offend. So
there's a difference. Yeah, this is great.
This is perfect. So there's a nuance here that we can just look at. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. So we should ask people where they're from when it's relevant to the work that we do. In her work, it is completely 100% appropriate for her to be asking those questions, right? The part about asking where people's from isn't necessarily the microaggression. It's the next layer of like, no, really, where are you from? You know, it's that part that is problematic. However, you know, there are times when I never ask someone where they're from because the fact is they may not want to tell me. So I'll give you an example. Uber drivers. You don't have any kind of like, you know, reason to know where they're from, right? There's no reason that you want to know or that you need to know, right? The Uber driver might have a green card. They might be a refugee. They might be from a country that has a lot of stigma, and they may actually not want to tell you where they're from because they don't know how you're going to respond. They don't know if you're asking them where they're from because you're making an assumption about who they are and what beliefs, and that that there's going to be a negative outcome around that. You don't know that. So, and you don't need to know, but you can ask another question. Do you live in town? What's your name? You know what I mean? Like, nice to meet you. Like, there's other ways that we can have conversations with people that are not about asking, where are you from? Like, what am I gonna, I need to know all of these, like, very specific details about your life. We need to not put people in that position. However, if it's for a reason that there's a closer proximity of a relationship, right? Then we ask, right? But there's other things that we can say to people. So hopefully that helps.
Yeah. Or I would say another example. So Sam, yes, please don't be afraid. You have a context in which that you're asking with the work that you're doing. I would say another place where I would where I think it's okay, in my opinion, would be I lived in Japan for a year. And so if I come across a woman who I know is Japanese and wanting to have a conversation about my time in Japan as a way of connecting. And what I found is it's exciting. Oh, wow, yeah, you lived in Japan, great, and it turns into a conversation.
Yeah.
And that there's a respectful way of going about that, of not offending someone, if perhaps it's a Japanese woman who's living in Korea, I don't know. So, I think that there's a way of going about it, that you're creating context and,
yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, but and again, I think the most important thing to just kind of, and at first it seems weird because you're in this kind of conscious place where you're saying like, oh, should I ask that? But after you do it a few times, it becomes natural. Like, you don't want to ask someone where they're from. What if they're not a citizen? What if they're undocumented and you're like, where are you from? Like, they don't want to tell you where they're from, like,
totally.
So like, those are the kinds of like things, like, you're in line, you're just like making small talk with people. There's so many other things we can talk about.
Exactly. One piece that I am present to right now, as we've just been having this conversation, is this belief in the women's empowerment, the personal development world of finding your tribe. And I think, so going back to what you were saying of like, before you actually go and create the website, of unpacking these beliefs, and this is the piece that I've been looking at myself, of where our culture is, people are so focused on finding their tribe, coming home to their tribe where they feel a sense of belonging, and mistaking that with, I have to be in the circle, I have to be in this tribe with a bunch of people who look and act like me and have the same background. And that's the piece that I'm working on unraveling. Before we then have the face of Sistership Circle change, of where is that in the underbelly of Sistership Circle, and how do we then reframe from the inside out that conversation, so we're no longer talking about finding your tribe and your people who are just like you, but finding a tribe with women and people who are different from you,
right? And
what that looks, so that to me is like the main conversation of where we need to do work within myself, within our facilitators, within our community, so that people really get the power and the value of circling with women who are different from you.
Yeah, and that's why a lot of us are moving away from the word tribe, even, because tribe really has, that kind of like the context around the word being like, people in your people that what a real tribe is like people who are of the same race or tribe or community of people, right, whose lives are so interconnected, and they're usually related. And the other reason, that a lot of people are moving away from it is because tribe has become adopted as this kind of like term that really means community, I think, is what people intend it to mean. But then we still have people who are actual tribal people who are looked down at as like third world people who like actually live in tribes, So if we can move towards like really thinking about being in community with people who share goals, right? Not people who look like you, but people who have the same beliefs as you, who are striving towards the same goals as you, who are committed to like the same kinds of things so that you can grow together. That's really what we want. And what happens when we do that is that the outcomes for everybody are better, because and that's why a lot of companies, even you look at the corporate level, like there's all these initiatives to try to diversify the workforce, because what we consistently find in research is that when you have diversity in thought and diversity in experience and diversity in all of these other, in age, your outcomes become better because you have different lenses at the table helping you to problem solve, right? So we really want that. The other side of that is that there are times when you want what we call like an affinity groups, where there are just programs that are for just women of color, or who, for example, Working Towards Woke is a program for white people. There are only white people in that group, and the reason there are only white people in that group is because white people need a place where they can show up and say things like, why is this racist? Or this happened, like, I don't understand. like, and not be worried that there are other people that they're going to offend again, or that they're going to feel judged. You know, we do the same work with people of color, but in a separate group, because the context is a little bit different. I have a program in my coaching business called Be a Boss. That program is for women of color, because millennial women of color, because they need a space. The age is an important part of it too. They need a space where they can say, this is what happened at work, and nobody understands, and not be afraid to be perceived as like the angry Black woman or the entitled millennial, right? So yeah. Affinity group work is important sometimes, but work that we're doing around growth and strategy, like the sistership circle, like everyone, again, outcomes get better when you have all that diversity of thought at the table. And we need to be okay knowing that, like, sometimes we need to be in our own space, and most of the time we need to be together.
Yeah. And that is what sistership circle is all about. If we're creating sisterhood on the planet, it's inclusive of everyone. And I'm very clear that that's what it needs to look like.
So because you can't do work on the planet if you're not serving in the world.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and that's why this is so important. So let's quickly talk about your program, and if there's women here who are wanting to go deeper, that they can know about working towards woke.
Yes, I'm so excited. Weez is my partner on the podcast. And we've both been doing diversity and equity work for like 15 years. We have a combined, like 30 plus years of combined experience. We're both coaches. We coach on different things, and we're kind of coming together to do this. So it's a 12-week program. There's a 7-week and a 12-week version of the program. And the first 7 weeks of the program is all the internal stuff that I was talking to you about. It's like making sure that you understand what these things even and I totally support you. You know, I support everything you stand for. And Accomplice is like, I am going to help you move the bar, like move the needle in this direction, right? I'm really taking a stand for that. So the first 7 weeks are all about that internal work. And then, so some people will do 7 weeks and then they'll like wrap up the program. And then the next 7 weeks are for people who are in leadership and who are entrepreneurs, because it's about the second part that we were talking about. Okay, how does this mean? What does all that internal stuff mean in your business? What are the actual strategies for communicating that you are open and welcome and inclusive, and that you are going to hold yourself and other people accountable? How do you make your programs accessible, right? So we talk about scholarships and sliding scales and kind of gateway programs and different things that, you know, different ways to kind of get people into your audience who are people who have a lot of variety, in race and age and experience. How you create and hold and uphold community standards, right? So the second half of the program is really that tactical stuff. Like, how do you create a business and an environment or lead from a place that is rooted in the concepts of equity? So we're just so excited for it to be started. And it starts like next week.
Awesome.
Yeah. So we've been enrolling people. And I really encourage anyone who's on this call, like if they are watching and they're interested, get in touch with me right away. We can still get you in. And if anyone in Sistership Circle who wants to join and can join us in this round, I'd be willing to give a free one-on-one session a one-on-one coaching session to kind of figure out, like, what does this mean for you personally?
Awesome. Wow. Okay. So do you have a website, or should people go directly to contact you? How should they sign up?
People can contact me if they have questions. So they can just contact me at hello@trudilebron.com, or they can find me on Facebook. That's where I hang out most. And if they want to just register for the class, they can go to nothowthatworks.com. So that's the name of the show, nothowthatworks.com. /working towards woke, and that'll take you to the page that has just all the info about what we'll cover. And we have payment plans that extend anywhere from 1 to 6 months. So, we try to make it as accessible as possible.
Great. Perfect. I put those links in the chat there. And yeah, I'm so glad that you're doing this. I'm so glad that I met you, and thank you for
Thank
just
you.
being an inspiration to me, and thank you for just being a stand for this. This is so important. It's so necessary, and you're so the one. Like, I'm just so
Thank
clear.
you.
Like, you're amazing, Trudi. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate that. It's super meaningful. And listen to the show, like if right now isn't the time to take a class, like listen to the podcast. We have a Facebook group, like, just join us, be in community with us.
Yeah, definitely check out the show. It's so fun to listen to you two just go back and forth and unpack things. And it was great. Like I just got to listen to that whole episode as I went to LA the other day, and
great.
Yeah, I was like, I want more. This is so good. Yeah. So all right, ladies. So if you are feeling the call and you're like, yes, this is the conversation for me in 2019, then I highly recommend that you join Trudi and Wheezy.
Yeah, Wheeze. Yep.
I don't know why I want to call her Wheezy, but
people do. I call her Wheeze. Some people call her Wheezy. It's fine.
Wheeze. So join these two incredible women, and let's do this, and let's rock this out. And we're gonna make mistakes, so let's do this together, ladies. This is our stand for 2019. So thank you, everyone, for joining me, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much.